Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We have a bigger crowd than we had this morning, so many of you have finally gotten off the highway just in time for lunch, and we appreciate that. And hopefully, you're getting a very nice meal. I think this group at the convention center does a terrific job of feeding so many in so short a time, so well. Again, I'm Vin Tufo. If you weren't here when I introduced myself this morning, not that that matters. But I'm the chair of the Connecticut Housing Coalition, so I have the great honor of being your MC today, and as I've done in previous years. So we have, again, as a recap, first of all, I hope you all enjoyed and had a wonderful morning getting to at least a couple of the breakout sessions. The ones that I went to were fabulous. And I think, and again, I credit the Housing Coalition staff with changing the program around from previous years so that that content was kind of all condensed into the morning hour. We're hearing from two honored guests today at the Luncheon Plenary. And we're going to continue food service and know that you have to continue to enjoy the food. Just chew quietly and I'm sure everything's going to be fine. Nobody's going to get hurt, so to speak. Our first speaker, which we're very happy to welcome again, and I don't want to say again and again and again because she has become such a close friend of the Housing Coalition, literally appearing at every one of our conferences and annual meetings since she took the job a few years ago. But she's really become a real close partner and extremely accessible, extremely open, and very, very collaborative with the Housing Coalition and all of you as members. And that, of course, is Yvonne Klein, who's the Commissioner of the Department of Housing. So, not that I have to, but what I'd like to do is read a little bit about her bio so that you can really understand where she's coming from. Yvonne was appointed in 2013 by the governor as the first commissioner of the Department of Housing. The Department of Housing, of course, was created at that time. There had been a Department of Housing in the past that was then folded into Department of Economic Development for many years as DECD. But now, once again, we have a dedicated Department of Housing and a dedicated commissioner to lead it. You all know, and most of you touch the Department of Housing in a variety of ways, through funding programs and other guidance and technical assistance. The types of programs, of course, are legion and as represented by you from many, many sectors of affordable housing. As we said this morning, though, and let's not forego an opportunity to credit the Department of Housing and the governor with the leadership to focus on the problem of chronic homelessness in Connecticut, as Yvonne is probably going to talk about a little bit, that has achieved the distinction of being the first state in the country to eliminate chronic veterans homelessness as it was last year, and to be well on its way to supporting programs necessary to eliminate chronic homelessness generally in our state, which is a fabulous accomplishment. It is something that may not touch every individual here or even in the state, but it's something that we all feel in our hearts. So with that, and from our hearts, I will welcome Yvonne Klein.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here again and again. Thank you so much, Vin, for that kind introduction. And from what I'm hearing from all accounts here from folks, it's been a great day here, another successful 27th annual, right? Successful conference. So congratulations to Florence and your staff. I wanted to take some time to share words with you from folks whose lives we've touched. We often hear or read about the lack of progress in ending homelessness across the country, and we often read and hear about how challenging it is to find an affordable home. We seldom hear about or read about the good news, the success stories. And I'm proud to say that here in Connecticut, we have a different story to tell. And the letters I'm going to read tell that story. Dear Commissioner Klein, I just wanted to take the time to thank you for this housing opportunity. I am in recovery, and I have a 4-year-old son. I was homeless for some time, and now I can honestly say my son and I have a home now, thanks to you. I can say I have come a long way. I got clean, I got my son back. No more DCF, and my son has his own room. I love hearing him say, "This is our home, Mommy, thanks to your help." And then another letter. Dear Commissioner Klein, a few years ago, I was alone in a deep hole, living on the streets, sleeping on any park bench. Now I write this letter in my own apartment on my day off. I'm living a normal life again, where I go to work, pay my bills, and enjoy spending time with my family! Exclamation point. Thanks. We have many success stories here in Connecticut, and we are fortunate to have formed a strong partnership, and that concludes all of us. Federal, state, and local governmental and non-governmental officials and agencies, quasi-public agencies, advocates, providers, and developers. Our providers on the ground have remained committed to ending homelessness and have worked with us to implement our CAN system and continue to make improvements to our system to ensure we end homelessness in Connecticut. The good news is we are. It began with ending chronic homelessness among our veterans. Then we effectively ended veteran homelessness, and now we are on the cusp of ending chronic homelessness throughout the state. And looking ahead, we have dedicated resources to ending youth homelessness as well as family homelessness. Based on what we have learned from our past successes, we know we can accomplish these goals. We've accomplished so much in the past 3 years. This was all part of the governor's vision, to make a difference in the lives of our most vulnerable, and we are. But that's not all. Under the Malloy administration, Connecticut is making extraordinary progress, not only in ending homelessness, but also in the preservation, rehabilitation, and creation of affordable housing. Since the start of the governor's first term, together with CHAFA, we have completed almost 8,200 units of affordable housing. We have another 3,200 under construction and have committed funding to approximately 5,200 additional affordable housing units, totaling almost 17,000 units of affordable housing. We continue to see unprecedented levels of funding invested in affordable housing under Governor Malloy and with the support of our legislature. These investments total more than $1 billion, a stark representation of the high level of commitment that the state is making to end homelessness and ensure that every resident has access to decent, safe, and affordable housing. Just last month, someone said that the folks who are homeless and those who are in need of decent, safe, and affordable housing don't have a lobbyist working on their behalf. Well, that's not entirely true. They may be correct that there isn't one lobbyist working on their behalf. Rather, it's all of us. And it is Governor Malloy who is leading the effort in Connecticut to end and prevent homelessness. He continues to fight for and provide the resources that will lift people out of poverty. Remember, it is this administration that has invested more in affordable housing than three previous gubernatorial administrations. These investments, as we know, are essential in keeping our young professionals in Connecticut, who, by the way, are the folks who are moving out of Connecticut. These investments are essential in attracting and keeping our workforce and keeping our seniors in their communities in which many of them lived for more than 50 years. I always look to and enjoy previewing where the department will be going during the next year or so. And it's really at this event that I've continued to do this the past 3 years, and I always enjoy forecasting for all of you folks. So looking ahead to meet the economic challenges we face in our state, we are becoming more creative in how we use our federal funding and are finding efficiencies within our department to ensure that we will continue to achieve our collective goals. As our partners, we know we can count on you to do the same. We will continue to apply for federal grants, but also will reach out to private foundations to partner with us to fund important initiatives. I mentioned that we have 17,000 units of affordable housing in some stage of construction to completion. By January of 2019, we expect to have reached a goal of 20,000 units. The department has made some important policy decisions that have proven to be transformative, and we are working hard to codify those changes to ensure the extraordinary progress continues. We will be looking more closely at state-owned properties and surplus properties to identify the housing opportunities that may exist. And clearly, it's time for Connecticut to take action and eliminate exclusionary zoning practices. Much work has been done to identify these practices and the changes that need to be made, and we will work with municipalities to make those changes. Ensuring access to affordable housing is part of Connecticut's economic recovery. It's good for local businesses, it's good for local communities, and most importantly, it's the right thing to do. As one resident wrote to me, we must find the time to stop and thank the people who make a difference in our lives. Thank you for partnering with us. Thank you for your commitment and your willingness to be pioneers in this important mission. I look forward to continuing our work together because together we are building a Connecticut where everyone will have a place to call home. Thank you very much.
I always get so inspired when Yvonne sort of gets to the big finish, because there is so much creative thought and commitment to continuing to evolve, continue to innovate. We all know, and I think it was mentioned by Florence this morning, that our local economy, national economy for that matter, is not stable. We know that the funding and the opportunities that we've enjoyed over the last several years may not exist equally into the future, or certainly using the same methodologies into the future because of anticipated deficits, looming deficits. But the way to deal with that is to recognize opportunity now when we have the capacity to take advantage of those. And I personally thank the Department of Housing, and I want to recognize Nick Lundgren, the Deputy Commissioner here, because he has no small part in this. And it's fantastic not only to think back in terms of what we've been able to do, but where this collaborative is going. And thank you, Yvonne, for sharing those thoughts with us and for sharing Nick with us, because we're all stronger because of your involvement. You guys snickering? I'll give you something. No, never mind. So our final speaker is with us today from Chicago. And I think that reference, Chicago, is probably going to resonate a little bit in his comments to you today because of what's going on and what we hear. We certainly hear it from 1,000 miles away. He's much, much closer to it. but what's really happening to literally cause parts of that city to be breaking apart. What Alex Kotlowitz is, in my opinion, is, and this isn't written, didn't come from any of the sort of critic quotes that I was given to read today, but is someone who's a passionate observer of what's really going on in our society, and not just what's going on at the tops of our society, but what's really happening literally in everyday society, especially in struggling communities. So Alex has written 3 books. I brought his name up as a plenary speaker for this conference because of one of the books that I had read. And I read the book only because the title seemed so compelling. And the title of the book was, "There Are No Children Here." As I said this morning, the title is a euphemism. The title is a euphemism for the way to describe a society where children's childhood is cut short, if they have a childhood at all. And when you think about your childhood and my childhood, what did it mean to us to be able to find ourselves, to grow, to develop, and to turn into productive adults and leaders of our families and leaders of our communities? Well, what happens when that childhood is taken away? And so Alex's book, and probably his other books too, which I haven't read yet, are really ways of helping us look into those communities and really understand better what we may not read from the media, what we even don't get from the reading or like a NPR long story or something like that. So he's written other books, The Other Side of the River. He's worked on produced a documentary called The Interrupters. He had been on the staff of the Wall Street Journal, contributes to the New York Times Magazine and NPR. But what he does now, and what we're very thankful that he does, is to observe society, write about it, speak about it, share it, and really help us see something that we may not see in our daily lives. So we're honored to have Alex Kotlowitz here today, and we're very much looking forward to sharing that with us. Thank you, Alex.
So I'm honored to be here today, though I've got to say I feel a little bit like an imposter. I'm not a housing advocate or a housing expert, nor am I someone with practical experience in community development, though I did have a very brief moment. Had happened here in Connecticut. I went to school at Wesleyan, and I had a mentor there, Connie Tyak, who was a city councilman and was president of the local machinists union at Pratt & Whitney. And Connie thought it was a good idea if I had some experience in local politics and got me appointed to the Citizens Advisory Board that advised the mayor on how to disperse community development block grant monies. And so I went and sat on the board, and one of the first things in front of us was an effort to widen a street in Middletown that happened to house the mayor's cousin's bank. And I didn't seem to make a lot of sense to me given the purpose of the CDBG grants. And so I kind of began to ask questions, and within a few weeks I was very unceremoniously dumped from that committee. And that was my extent of my experience in housing. What I do, has been alluded to, is I tell stories. Stories, I suppose, that try to help us understand each other and ourselves. And I guess that's what I hold in common with you. Through practice, you through practice and I through narrative, try to make sense of the world, try to make sense of why we do what we do, try to push us in the end to do well by each other and ourselves. So given all that, what I'd like to do this afternoon is begin by sharing with you a story, and it involves a young girl named Dee Dee. And I first met Dee Dee some 25 years ago when I was working on There Are No Children Here, which is a book that follows 2 young boys. They were brothers living in a public housing complex in Chicago, and Dee Dee was their 12-year-old cousin, and she was a girl who had quite a wild streak. She got into fights, she cut school, she had an alcoholic mother and an absent father, and I worried about her. And I kind of lost touch with her, and after the book came out, a couple of years after the book came out, I happened to be passing through the Henry Horner Homes, this public housing complex, and I ran into Dee Dee in a parking lot right by the Boys and Girls Club. And by this point, she was a young woman. She was 19 years old, and she looked horrible. She was completely emaciated. Her clothes were hanging off of her like sheets on a clothesline. She had dark circles under her eyes. Her hair was a mess. She seemed in a daze. In fact, she was leaning against the hood of a car, falling in and out of sleep. It was clear to me that she'd become addicted to crack cocaine. This is back in the early 90s during the crack epidemic. I was deeply worried about her. I gave her a hug, and it was like she was so thin, it was like holding a collection of bones. And I figured this would be the last time I'd see her. Honestly, she looked about as close to death as one could get without actually dying. She was gone, just swallowed by the ravages of her community. So I want to fast forward to just a few years ago. I'd gotten word that Pork Chop, who was Dee Dee's older brother, who was now in his 30s, had been shot coming out of a liquor store, and it appeared to be a case of mistaken identity. But as soon as I got wind of the shooting, I rushed down to the hospital on the city's west side, and as I was standing in the lobby in a line to get a pass to go up and visit Pork Chop, behind me was this young man and young woman, very handsomely dressed, and the woman tapped me on the shoulder at some point, and she said, "Alex." And I turned around, and she was smiling, and I have a terrible time with faces, and trust me, it doesn't get any easier as you get older. And I tried to place her, and I apologized that I couldn't recognize her, and I said to her, "I know you look familiar. How do we know each other?" And she laughed and threw her arms around me, and it was Dee Dee. And as we waited in line there, she told me very quickly her story. She remembered my running into her in the parking lot some 25 years earlier, and she told me she was indeed a prisoner of crack. And she said then she had a daughter, and everything changed. She got herself off of drugs. She began going to church, where she met her future husband, a truck driver who was standing by her side here in the hospital lobby. And here she was, completely filled out, bright-eyed, and so pointed, so smart, I couldn't stop smiling. And I tell this story up front to caution us against what the Nigerian-born novelist Chimamanda Adichie calls the danger of the single story. The danger of thinking that people have a single narrative. That, for instance, if you're growing up poor on Chicago's west side, that your story is the same as the person next door. Or that because you're poor, that we think we know your story. Or in the case of Dee Dee, because you're poor and a drug addict, that we think we know the shape of your narrative. As Adichie warns, show people one way over and over again, and that's what they become. I mention this before anything else because stories are essential to understanding who we are. Stories are how we make sense of the world, how we make sense of our own lives and of those around us. Think about it. Stories inform policy. They inform the way we allocate resources. They inform the way we think about ourselves and others. They inform the present and help sculpt the future. And so we need to take care not to craft a single narrative, not to pigeonhole people, not to think we already know when in fact we know very little. We need to be willing to get knocked off balance, to be astonished, to have our assumptions poked and prodded, even sometimes directly challenged. We need to recognize the danger of that single narrative. Adichie suggests that stories, if not told honestly, leads to a lazy, simplified view of the world, a lazy, simplified view of humanity. And so what I hope to do here today is to talk about the profound poverty in our cities, and to do so honestly, at least honest to what I've seen and heard, and to do so in a manner that respects the messy vitalities of the American landscape. And I also want to talk about the place of story, especially the place of story in your work. I should tell you, I'm honored to be speaking to a group of people who see themselves so aligned with those without, those who because of race or class or geography or ethnicity find themselves pushed aside, marginalized, disenfranchised, those who Studs Terkel like to call the et ceteras of the world. I feel honored speaking to a group of people so committed to maintaining our social compact, and more precisely, a group of people focused on shelter, on housing, which I think often gets short shrift in any conversation about poverty and community. I can remember when I was spending time at the Henry Horner Homes in public housing, it was clear the effect that housing had on the lives of those individuals. It was clear that the physical design of these communities and the decision to build the high-rises on the cheap and their utter neglect and the demographic makeup of the complex had a profound and deep impact on the lives of the residents. So let me perhaps state the obvious and what you already know, but housing or home is essential to our well-being. It's essential to who we are. So I want to share with you some stories, ruminations really, which I hope can help us reflect on the nature of community, especially in neighborhoods marked by the profound intergenerational poverty we find in our cities. And I hope that what I have to offer today will be helpful as you consider the place of housing in shaping, or as the case may be, reshaping the trajectory of people's lives. Let me begin with just a couple of sobering thoughts. When I began work on There Are No Children Here in 1987, 1 out of every 5 children in this country were growing up in poverty. And at the time, the nation was shocked, outraged even. Today, we're still at that same number. I also had an experience a few years ago where I screened my film, The Interrupters. The Interrupters, which I'll talk a little bit about later, is a film about the violence in Chicago. And it was filmed mostly on the south side of the city. And we had the good fortune to be able to screen the film at Danville at a medium security prison in central Illinois. And we had about 100 inmates there. It's the only time I've done a screening where they had to keep the lights on. It was the rules of the prison. But anyway, afterwards, we had time for questions. And the first 2 men who stood up had been in prison for 23 years and 19 years, respectively. And they were, both of them were near tears. Both of them, it turns out, had grown up in Englewood, one of the communities featured in the film. And they were distraught by how much worse it looked than from the time they'd last been there. And this is what we're up against, the possibility that not only have things not gotten better, but that in fact, in many ways, they've only gotten worse. So let me first begin by dealing with a couple of myths I think we hold about the entrenched poverty of our cities. I think one of the myths that we have is that in these neighborhoods, there's a strong sense of community. But in fact, what I have seen are communities that have begun to unravel. When I first began spending time at the Henry Horner Homes, I had expected to find distrust towards outsiders like myself, which I certainly found. But what I didn't expect to find was distrust between neighbors. And I always remember Lafayette, the older of the 2 boys. He was 12 years old at the time. When I asked Lafayette to introduce me to some of his friends, Lafayette said to me, "I don't have friends, I just have associates, friends you trust." This was a 12-year-old boy speaking. These are communities in which work, meaningful work, has virtually disappeared. And I would argue that work is the very thread that holds the social fabric together. And when you think about work, there's both the reality of work and the culture of work. And the reality of work, I think, is pretty self-evident. It provides income for food, shelter, and clothing. But there's also the culture of work. If you think about it, work gives us a sense of purpose, a sense of identity. It connects us to the world around us. It provides order. It gives us a beginning, middle, and end to our days. Well, without work, without jobs, people lose that sense of purpose. They lose that sense of identity. Their days begin to melt into each other. And without work, people feel disconnected from themselves and from those around them. These are also often communities that are physically and spiritually isolated from the rest of us. It's certainly apparent in my hometown, Chicago, where the communities that are most distressed cover a swath on the west and south side of the city, completely isolated from the prosperity of the rest of the metropolis. These are often communities that have little to do with the rest of us. I always remember when I was working on There Are No Children Here, Mother Teresa had come to visit that community, and she said she was really so taken aback by what she saw that she ended up sending 4 sisters from her order to live and work in that neighborhood. And what shocked her was not the poverty of the pocketbook. She had certainly seen worse in India. But what so distressed her was what she called the poverty of the spirit. These are communities that are fraying, communities whose seams are coming apart. The other myth I want to talk about, which is related to this notion of community, has to do about the violence, which has been so stubborn and persistent, especially in my city. But this notion that somehow people living in these communities acclimate to it, that they somehow become hardened to it or numb to it. And I would argue that we have completely underestimated the effect of the violence on both the spirit of individuals as well as the spirit of families and communities. And I would argue that it's one single act of violence around which the rest of a childhood will revolve. The numbers are staggering, unimaginable really, at least in my hometown. And I should tell you that as bad as it is in Chicago, we are not even in the top 15 most violent cities in this country. But if you consider the first 10 years of this century, in my city, we've had 5,352 people killed by gunfire and another 23,400 wounded by a shooting. And I should tell you that the vast majority of those shootings take place in a very concentrated part of the city. The violence is so pervasive in many of our cities that it forms its own culture. It puts communities and residents on the defensive. Just the language, the signage, even the dress and the ritual. When a murder occurs, street shrines arise during the summer with the ubiquity of perennials, and they stand as monuments to the deceased, a kind of community catharsis. Friends and family leave stuffed animals or liquor and beer bottles or notes of love and prayer. The acronym RIP, Rest in Peace, has become so ever-present that you find it not only in the makeshift shrines, but also tattooed on people's bodies, painted on the walls of apartments, scrawled on the sides of buildings, embossed in T-shirts and jackets. It's as if communities are piecing together the equivalent of a war memorial. If you listen closely to the language of our youth, it reflects what they're up against. A number of years ago, I was visiting Lawndale Christian Academy on Chicago's west side, spending some time there with the principal, who I've known for a long time, Myra Sampson. And that morning, as we walked through the school halls, she would poke her head into the classrooms to say good morning to the students. And she'd ask everybody how they were doing. And most of the boys would respond, staying out of trouble. And as Myra said to me later, that's often what their parents say to them as they leave the house: stay out of trouble. In other words, keep your head up, look around you, be cautious, stay safe. I want to show some slides, if I could, real quick. These are photos of signage of block club signs on the south and west sides of Chicago. And if you think about it, block clubs are ordinarily a mark of celebration. And yet here in these signs, they announce their intentions not in language that speaks to their dreams, but rather language that speaks to their fears. These are communities, to borrow a term from the world of psychology, that are hypervigilant, that are wary and weary. They're collectively looking over their shoulder. How can they focus on what might be when their energy is on what is? These are communities that are often living entirely in the present, trying in some ways to fend off the future. You know, the violence of our cities sap the spirit of even the most spirited of people. And yet, in recent years, this has been this robust and urgent conversation about how we can best assist soldiers returning from the battlefields in Iraq and Afghanistan. Many, as we now well know, suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. Yet we've neglected those here whose emotional wounds fester. A few years ago, for a two-part series for the public radio show This American Life, I spent 6 months at a high school, Harper High, on the south side of the city, situated in Englewood, the community I mentioned earlier. And there I embedded myself with these two social workers. I met them on the first day of school, and I just kind of fell in love with them. They were both so spirited. And so I ended up just sort of spending my 6 months holed up in their office, which was a windowless room in the middle of the school building. And the reason we went to Harper was that the previous year, the school had lost eight current and former students to gun violence and had another 21 shot and wounded. And so it was a school that was trying to get its feet back on the ground. And through these two social workers, I got to know a student, Harper, Thomas. And I got to know him because Thomas spent much of his time in their office. And I got there at the start of the school year in mid-August. Schools start early in Chicago. And just a couple of months earlier, in June, Thomas had been sitting on the porch of an abandoned building with his best friend, Shikaki Asfi, who was a year younger than him, a sophomore at the school. And as they were sitting there talking, a young man in a hoodie ran out from the gangway and began shooting at them. And Thomas was able to avoid the gunfire, but Shikaki got hit. And Thomas was with her on the porch as Shikaki told Thomas, "It burns, it burns." And Shikaki died on the way to the hospital. Thomas had already witnessed 2 other killings, including at the age of 10, when at a party, the birthday girl, who was also 10, was hit and killed by a stray bullet. And Thomas told me that in those days after Shikaki's death, he couldn't sleep. And about a week later, he punched someone. And he concedes that it was over nothing. It was an older boy who had pushed his younger cousin, and so Thomas hit the older boy, hit him so hard, in fact, that one of his teeth got embedded in Thomas's fist. And Thomas told me that once he hurt his hand, he was able to sleep again. It was that simple. Getting in this stupid fight brought him some sense of relief. I sat in that social worker's office when Thomas would tell them, "I want to hurt someone. I want to hurt someone." And at first I thought it was kind of just bravado, tough guy talk. But then I realized he was trying, as best he could, to be honest about some feelings he has that scare him. One of the social workers told me later, "You've got kids walking around here who are just on guard with everything and everyone. It's almost like you don't have a moment to rest." Experience violence in the way that Thomas does, and the world begins to look hostile. You are, as one of the social workers told me, always on guard, waiting for the next assault, waiting for the next shooting, and the anger, as it does in Thomas, just builds and builds and builds. You walk into any classroom in any inner city school and you ask how many have lost a loved one to violence or have witnessed a shooting, and virtually every hand will go up. And most will tell you that they've never talked about it. In fact, children are often discouraged from sharing their experiences out of fear that if they do, they'll somehow be held culpable for the crime. So the question is, why the violence? And I'm not sure that I have answers that, for me, are filled with certitude, but I do think there are a couple of things going on. I think one of the things is it's apparent that much of the violence has to do with disputes that erupt into something more, and usually disputes that are over a reasonably small slight, some small act of disrespect. And these are communities which for decades have been utterly disrespected, and so people look where they can for a sense of dignity and purpose. And for the young, who often don't foresee much future, they find that dignity and purpose in what they perceive as standing up for themselves. I think the other thing at work here, too, is that those living in these communities have experienced a justice system that has malfunctioned. You know, consider that in Chicago last year there were nearly 3,000 people shot and wounded by gunfire. 2,600 of those incidents went unsolved. And so often people in these communities, especially young people, see the only way to justice is to take matters in their own hands. Trust has evaporated because of the absolute, unmitigated destructive power of the violence. The violence and breakdown of community are intertwined. They feed on each other. Where there's violence, people pull inward, they become distrustful, they come to see the world as hostile, and in communities that have broken down, the terrain becomes ripe for violence. And so I don't need to tell you this, but we need to find ways to rebuild and fortify community. If we do nothing to reduce the shootings, if we do nothing to bring meaningful work into these communities, if we do nothing to interrupt the legacy of mass incarceration, if we do nothing to provide decent and affordable housing, we will make little or no difference in the lives of those whose sense of promise flickers rather than burns bright. But this all in some ways feels so obvious, so self-evident, that the real question I ask, and I'm sure the real question that you ask, is where has everyone been? Rebuild communities and families will become stronger. Rebuild communities and individuals will find hope. Rebuild communities and we will diminish the violence. Again, I feel like an outsider here. You're the experts. You've recognized by the nature of your work the foundational power of providing decent and affordable housing. But let me, if I can, with some hesitation, tell you briefly what I see working. One of the things for me that's been encouraging over the years, and it's nothing new, but I think we've neglected them, is the growth of community development corporations, which over time have become much more sophisticated. The best of them have come to think holistically. They not only focus on housing and economic development, but the best of them have job training programs or daycare centers or counseling services or in-home services for the elderly or after-school programs, and sometimes even a school or a health clinic. The CDCs understand we can't view programs aimed at rebuilding community as just taking care of the bricks and mortar. We can't think of fortifying community if we don't look at all that goes into creating a place that feels safe and secure, a place in which there's a common purpose, a place in which people feel like they belong. I think it also goes without saying that it's so essential that we find ways to provide education. Education in schools have been sort of seen as the transcendent force in our society, and as I think we've well known, and as you guys know in Connecticut better than most, it's become somewhat of a myth. We need to find a way to make education that transcendence force that we believe it could be. And then we need to recognize the essential place of home in fortifying family along with fortifying community. And I think I came to realize this most viscerally when I spent a month in Cleveland immediately after the 2008 housing crisis. I was working on a piece for the New York Times Magazine, and I spent a month in Cleveland, which was completely devastated by what had happened. And one of the places that I spent time when I was in the city was in the city's housing court, which was derisively referred to by the other judges as the rat court. And in ordinary times, you know, the housing court's main function was to ensure that owners mowed their lawns, trimmed their hedges, cleaned up the garbage, repaired, you know, leaning porches or hanging gutters, you know, making sure that there were no rats in the city. But in the wake of the housing crisis, this lowliest of courts had become one of the most powerful instruments in the city's fight for survival. As one city councilman told me, the housing court's the only tool we have when we get them into court. He's talking about the banks. We can't let them go. So I sat in the housing court, which was run by this very affable Judge Ray Pianca, and for a number of mornings, and it became clear to me that people who came into that court had absolute trust in Judge Pianca. Virtually every defendant who stepped into that courtroom pled no contest. And as one defendant said at one point, I plead whatever it takes. And Judge Pianca wanted to understand two things when people came into his courtroom. These are people who came in because of some housing violation. At this point, given what had happened in 2008, they were pretty serious housing violations. He wanted to know what got them there, what were the violations. That seemed pretty obvious, but here's where I think his courtroom differs from any other courtroom I've been in. Judge Pianca wanted to know what got them to that place. Had their house been foreclosed? Did they lose their job? Were there other circumstances at work? I was awestruck. Here was a judge who was looking to find empathy, a judge who knew that the answers to those questions would help guide him in finding solutions so that the court could remedy the problem and so that the defendants could avoid fines or jail time. And more importantly, so that they could move forward with their lives. And so when he found out what had gotten to them that place, Judge Pianca would send out the equivalent of caseworkers to help them both with the physical repairing of their homes, but also helping to refer them to any other kind of assistance they might need. Judge Pianca recognized that he was not only assisting individual families, but entire neighborhoods. He knew what it meant to have 2, 3, sometimes half a dozen abandoned properties on your block. And indeed, Judge Pianca so loves his city that every lunch hour he drives through a different neighborhood, and when he sees an abandoned or a rundown house that hasn't made it into his courtroom, he calls the city housing inspectors and asks them to come out and take a look. Judge Pianca operates under the unspoken notion that housing is absolutely essential to the well-being of community. His court uses housing as a kind of gateway to assisting people who are struggling, a gateway to lending a hand, a gateway to rebuilding community. He recognized that each person who came into his courtroom, that their very essence had been diminished by the threatened loss of their home or their inability to maintain it. A decent, safe, affordable home is essential to the maintenance of the human spirit, to the fortification of both family and community. Finally, I think it's essential, and this is where I come full circle, is we need to tell stories. This is my bias, I understand that. It's what I do. But we need to tell stories so that others can see what we see and others can hear what we hear. We need to tell stories so that others can understand. Empathy, as Judge Pianca instinctually recognized, is the underpinning of community. It's what ensures that life is fair and just, that people act decently and honorably, that the state embraces its citizens, all of its citizens. Empathy is also the centripetal force of storytelling. Stories let us experience the world through the eyes of others. And I want to urge you not to underestimate your singular place that you hold in our society. Most of you, given your work, bridge the two Americas. You hear stories that most of us don't have reason to hear. You see things the rest of us don't see. It's your responsibility, obligation really, to help the rest of us hear what you hear and see what you see. Those of you who work in these communities need to get us to bear witness along with you. For it's through storytelling that is honest and square to what we see, that you'll get the rest of us to find empathy. We need to hear stories, the unpredictable stories of those whose voices have been lost amidst the cacophonous noise of ideologues, and rhetorical ruffians. And we need to do it in a way that is true to what you see, to what you experience. You know, too often we speak in shorthand of gangbangers and thugs, of teenage moms and at-risk youth, of ex-felons and drug addicts. Well, remember Dee Dee? I thought I knew her, but I didn't. When I began filming The Interrupters, the film I mentioned earlier, I thought I knew, but I didn't. This is a film we followed 3 individuals who work as violence interrupters for an anti-violence organization, and their job is to go out and suss out disputes in the neighborhood and try to intervene before they erupt into something more. And there's a moment when we were filming when we got a call from one of the interrupters in the film, Kobe Williams. Kobe had gotten a call from a young man he'd met years ago in the county jail, a guy named Flamo. And you can imagine with a name like that, Flamo had a reputation on the streets as a renegade, someone you didn't want to mess with. And it turns out that someone had called the police on Flamo, reporting that he had guns in his house. And so when the police came to his house, Flamo wasn't there, but they ended up handcuffing his mother and arresting his brother. And Flamo was enraged. And by the time Kobe, with us in tow, got to Flamo's house, Flamo had been downing a pint of vodka. He was carrying a pistol that was tucked into his waistband, and he was boiling over with rage. He knew, or thought he knew, who had called the police, and he was planning payback. And so I wanted to show you a quick clip from the film here, if I could. You'll have to excuse the language in the first language you guys have heard plenty before.
He left me a voicemail.
What up, Dad? I got some important news to talk to you about.
I got a call from a guy I met in jail. He said this guy sent the police into the house talking about he was doing illegal things.
Call me back.
Say the police kicked his door in, locked up his brother, they threw handcuffs on his mother. And he talking about he knew who had sent the police in this house. He was looking for him.
I ain't found your bitch ass yesterday, nigga. Man, fuck that pussy ass nigga.
What's up? My man Flamo make you laugh, but if you fuck with him, you better bring it on.
These motherfuckers came here, man. Had my motherfucking mama handcuffed, my little brother handcuffed and shit, man. Took my little brother, one got shot. In the fucking wheelchair, man. Took him to jail.
But still though, man, you got to try to leave that shit alone though,
I ain't
man.
leaving shit alone till I get these motherfuckers. You already know how I get in.
I mean, but that shit ain't gonna make no...
Boy, it's gonna make it better for me.
I'm sorry to hear about your brother, but still though, they don't make shit no
I need my phone.
They ain't gonna make shit no better though.
Fuck making it better. I'm walking around my fucking pistol. Can you grab my phone, brother? I can't, you know.
Man, you crazy, man, be out here like that.
It's love and everything, but I ain't feeling that, none of this shit. And I respect y'all, you know what I'm saying, what you're doing and everything, that's cool. But fuck that. I'm not with ceasefire. What was y'all letting these motherfuckers came kicking my door in?
What I'm saying is we can't erase what already happened, but the whole thing is you got to look at it like, man.
You can't erase what happened, you right. And you can't predict what the fuck I'm finna do. Shit.
You know, we just try to work shit out.
Offer you options and solutions to the problem.
Man, fuck this shit. Fuck a problem. Fuck a solution. These motherfuckers trying to take my shit. You ain't just cross me, you cross my fucking mama. For my mama, nigga, I come in your crib and kill every motherfucker body.
Two of your brothers gone. If you be gone, they ain't gonna do nothing but hurt your mama.
She'll be all right.
How many kids you got?
I'm claiming 4.
All right, but I'm
That's
just
it.
saying, so if you go to jail, who will take care of your kids?
That's the thing. God taking care of us now. He gonna take care of them. Just like when I do what I'm gonna do, he gonna take care of me too.
But you was locked up before for the same shit, though.
Man, I'm 32 years old. I've been locked up 15 years in my life. What that mean? What the fuck that mean? That's where I grew up at. God damn it, ain't no shame, ain't no secret. Shit. I'm tired of being out here any motherfucker way. It's bored as hell out here. Soft-ass niggas out here ain't doing shit but drinking. That ain't the police, is it? What's that on the corner? I know these punk-ass police still want me. Motherfuckers gonna have to kill me.
Man, that shit crazy, man.
How can you help me? Right now. How can you help me?
I mean, the only thing, like I say, the only thing I could do is try to get to know you more, spend a little time with you, and try to work with you.
So that means
man.
you will take me out to dinner then? We can go to lunch right now, and we can sit down and we can talk about this motherfucking problem. That's what you telling me?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'ma hold you to that goddamn shit.
Yeah, we could go out. If
When?
that's what you want to do.
When?
We could go out now.
Right now?
Yeah.
Let me go put my pistol up.
I don't know. We'll just see. Hi, Rock. Make sure, though, man, he ain't got shit on him.
I'm good. I ain't got nothing.
Yeah, it's a rough one. I think that's one of the worst ones I had.
You know, what's astonishing for me in this moment is that Kobe did something so simple it feels almost laughable. He invited Flamo out to lunch. And then, you know, he took him to a meeting of the interrupters, and then a few weeks later he took him out to dinner. He stayed with him. I'm not going to give away the film, but suffice it to say, we were surprised, Kobe was surprised by Flamo's journey. In the end, I came to realize that all Flamo needed was someone to listen to his story, someone to acknowledge his grievance, someone to believe in him. Kobe knew this instinctually. In his own life, Kobe, who had been in the streets, had a grandmother who refused to give up on him. And despite all the trouble he had gotten into, Kobe told me she never turned her back on me. And it's moments like this that remind us there's no single narrative, that there's no single story. Over the course of the 14 months that we filmed, it became apparent that the one constant for those like Flamo, for those who were able to emerge from the wreckage of their lives and their neighborhoods, was to have someone in their life who carried high expectations for them, someone who treated them with a sense of dignity and decency, someone who saw them for who they are, rich, full, nuanced, complicated individuals whose lives and stories don't neatly fit into some predetermined slot. Kobe saw in Flamo something more than just an angry young man. And this is the challenge for all of us in the end, to not define others by their circumstance or by a moment in their lives, but rather to come to know them for who they are. Thank you. So we've got time, I think, for some questions. I'm glad to talk about what I've spoken about here or about my work. Yeah, please.
Oh, excuse me. Thank you. When is the film and when is it coming out?
Yeah, it's actually out. We premiered it a number of years ago on Sundance, and it aired as a 2-hour special on PBS's Frontline. But you can get it on Netflix or on you can get it online.
Is it on Sunday? You said Sundays?
What's that?
You said Sundays?
It premiered at Sundance. Yeah,
Oh,
at the
in
film
Sundance,
festival. Yeah,
Sundance Film Festival.
Right.
Okay.
But you can get it at Netflix or iTunes.
So it's not on the air anymore right now?
No.
Oh,
no,
okay. Thank you
no,
so much.
sure.
Thank you for coming.
Sure. Somebody back there has a question too. Who are some of the writers I'm influenced by? Boy, a lot. So I probably read more fiction than I do nonfiction. I know this sounds maybe a little cliche, but Dostoevsky kind of got me through the dark days of adolescence. And so his work had a terrific influence. But there are a number of nonfiction writers who have had a real impact on me. I think of John Hersey, his book Hiroshima, Tony Lucas's Common Ground, Tracy Kidder's work, Studs Terkel, his work had terrific influence on me. But I think any writer worth their salt, and any writer who's being honest with you, will tell you that they steal a little bit from here and a little bit from there. And then there are a number of novelists who I'm huge fans of. I mean, Tim O'Brien, for example, I think is just one of probably the most astonishing novelist writing today.
I have a very simple question. Given your life experience, can you comment on the presidential election? Can you comment on immigration and Black Lives Matter?
Yeah. Well, I don't need to tell you guys this. This is I think a very scary time. I've long believed, and I still do, that sadly that Trump has a a chance of winning this election. Maybe not a great chance, but he's got a chance. I think for me, what's been most unsettling, I mean, Trump himself is deeply distressing, but I think what has been most unsettling is the kind of support he's received in this country. And it's, I will tell you, as somebody who's spent his career trying to understand my nation, trying to understand my neighbors, I feel like this is the first time I felt like I don't fully understand who we are. I think the inherent, and I don't use this word lightly, the inherent racism in Trump's campaign has been really disturbing. And his inability to sort of acknowledge and recognize the history of this country, the history of African Americans. I mean, again, it's this kind of willful ignorance that he carries with him on just about every subject. I think, you know, Black Lives Matter, I think is an absolutely critical movement in this country. I think some of the rhetoric early on probably got away from them. But I think it's really done wonders to make us, I think, much more attuned to what it means to be black, especially what it means to be black and poor in this country, and to recognize, I think, that race still very much matters. But look, I think like everybody else, I'm just hoping come November that this country comes to its senses. But it is a scary time. It makes everything else feel almost incidental, you know. And as a writer, I can tell you, it's hard for me to spend time working on anything when I know that so much is at stake. Right. So I should tell you that I'm not, my bailiwick is not public policy. I mean, though, of course, I spend time reading and sort of trying to understand what's working and not working out there. My hope is that by telling stories that I get policymakers to spend time in communities that they otherwise might not venture to. And sometimes with stories, you know, people can come to stories, and given all the baggage that they bring, they can see what they want to see. I always remember after There Are No Children Here came out, I was invited to the White House. This was the first Bush presidency, and I'm sitting among all these domestic policy folks talking about community development corporations, which had just begun to emerge. And I talked about the sort of need to really invest in these CDCs, some of whom were performing these kind of small miracles in these neighborhoods. And I remember one of the people in the room raised his hand and said, "You see, this is just evidence that the Reagan years worked." And so part of the problem with stories sometimes is people bring their own baggage to it. I think, for me, I think one of the things that's both exciting and troubling is there's so much going on out there. I look in my own city, for example, and all the anti-violence work, and there's so much going on out there, some of which clearly is working, some of which isn't working. Vin, you and I were talking about this earlier. I think one of the things that's pretty evident to me is that often these organizations, which on the surface seem to be doing incredible work, that there's really very little scientific evidence to know what difference they're making, and if they're making a difference. But I think for me, what's most disturbing is just how disparate all these activities were. I mean, there's one thing that's very encouraging about a conference like this is you bring together all these people who are working on this issue in housing in Connecticut to come talk about that. You don't see that in Chicago around the violence, for instance. And so people are often working at cross purposes. People who believe that they have found kind of, excuse the metaphor, but have found the magic bullet, and believe that they're the only ones who have the answers. And as you guys well know, that this is that something like the violence, for example, requires such a multi-pronged approach. So I think we've got a lot of work to do. I think for me, the thing that's most disturbing that I alluded to earlier is that I don't know that we have the political will. And that's the thing that we've got to figure out how to grow.
Right here.
Hi, I was wondering if you could comment on, based on your point that you have organizations that are working on anti-violence in Chicago, I'm wondering if you can comment on job creation, because I agree with your earlier point, which was that that can make the huge difference in dignity for the individuals, and especially for youth to get their first jobs, which turns into second jobs and can change a trajectory.
Right. So there are two issues here. One is the kind of mechanical part, which is of job creation and getting people to jobs. And it's interesting, Arnie Duncan, who just stepped down as head of Department of Education, I really give Arnie credit. He really could have gone and done just about anything. And he's come back to Chicago and is undertaking an effort to try to build a program that would help young men from 17 to 25 find work. He recognized the essential place of that in people's lives. I think the other thing that we haven't really talked about in this country that really gets in the way, of course, is that if you come back from prison with a felony on your record. In Chicago, we have anywhere between 20 to 25,000, mostly young men, every year returning to what are basically 5 or 6 neighborhoods in the city. And because of that felony on your record, it can be impossible, virtually impossible to find work or find meaningful work. And so for a country that likes to think of itself as a very forgiving place, we are not very forgiving of those who have served their time. And so that's the other part of this equation that I think we really have to have a robust and rigorous conversation about.
I just wanted to thank you for your remarks and tell you how timely it was on the way in to work this morning. There was a news story on NPR that apparently Chicago has exceeded the 3,000.
Right, from last year, right?
Yeah, it's a statistic from last year. And I guess the city is responding by hiring 1,000 new police officers. Right. And it feels like the cycle just continues, and some of the issues that create the problem just get reinforced. And I think cities go into panic mode and feel like they need to do something right away, as opposed to look at a more organic solution.
Right. Well, I think the mayor in Chicago, Mayor Rahm Emanuel, you may have heard of him, is giving an address, a major address tonight in the city around the violence. And one of the things, as you point out, he's going to announce is the hiring of nearly 1,000 new police officers. I think one of the mistakes we've made in Chicago and elsewhere is thinking that somehow this is a problem that can be solved by law enforcement. And as a result, we've only exacerbated that divide between the police and those living in these communities. Again, you drive through in Englewood or the west side of Chicago, and I think for me the thing that's most apparent, I was mentioning this to somebody earlier, is how these are communities that are still not recovered. I know this is hard to believe, that it's still not recovered from the 2008 housing crisis. I mean, you go on blocks where there are 3 or 4 abandoned, boarded up properties, and there's no way that you can think that you can have any kind of strong community if you're unable to put the kind of resources in to make these places safe and secure and feel like decent places to live. Our schools, as they have in Connecticut, have failed these communities. The lack of work, I mean, I think it requires much more than just law enforcement, and I hope that the mayor is going to offer more than that this evening.
I think that we have time for one more question.
Hi, as a film,
I've heard
as a
today.
film writer, I need to know, when is someone going to make a movie about reality of how we all live? It's not just about black lives, it's about all our lives. This affects all of us.
Right.
I want to know when can someone make a movie to put it with all nationalities of what we go through, not just blacks. Right. We all go through something. They're going through now, people are dying over drug overdose. It's not just about us, it's about all of us. And when they stop putting us individually and start putting us back as groups to help each other, we can make it in this world. Right. It's bad enough. Afghanistan is every time you turn around, you're blaming Afghanistan, you're blaming this one, that one for the bombs. It's all of us. We got to take care of each other. Whether you like me because of my skin, the way I talk or look, someone needs to make a film about that. Why you can't do a film about that? So I could teach my daughters, look, this happened, but this is what we're going to do. We're going to try to stick together and make this work.
Right. Right. Well, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think one of the challenges for me as a storyteller is twofold. Is that one, I spend time, I tell stories, say, from the south side of Chicago, and to be able to tell them in a way that gives people a sense of humanity and presents them as these, as I said earlier, these complicated, rich, nuanced individuals. I mean, part of what I'm after in my work is to try to challenge people's assumptions, like with Flamo. You watch that episode, and I think you watch that scene, and I think for many people they think, oh, I know this guy, I know who he is, but I can assure you that given Flamo's journey after this moment, that he's much more than what you see in this moment. I think the other thing that maybe you're alluding to, and I will tell you it's something that I struggle with a lot, is there is this notion in the country that the African American community is very monolithic. It's certainly how Trump views the African American community. And I fear sometimes by doing a film like this that it only feeds that assumption. And I recognize that, and I don't pretend to know sort of what to do in response to that, but I think one of the things that we've got to recognize is the African American community, just as the Latino and the white communities, that it's not at all homogenous, and that there's in fact a very strong black middle class in this country that we can't ignore. And I recognize that sometimes my work is just showing this sliver of who we are.
Well, please, all of us, please thank Alex for his wonderful remarks. So uncharacteristically for me, I'm a little speechless to hear and the number, the depth, and the heartfelt stories that come not only from Alex's words but from the words of the people that he's trying to portray. So this is a call to action for any of us to not be complacent, to not be thinking that that housing is the solution. It's part of a broader solution. He used the word holistically, and we all know that word, and we all know that housing is one part of the social fabric that we're trying to reach out to. And as we've talked about in other conferences, many of you have been here before, is find other partners in other sectors and think about how you can collaborate, work together, and bring about a rebuilding of the communities that you spend so much time and so much of your lives in trying to rebuild. So a metaphor would be whether we act or not, time continues to march on. As of 10:21 this morning, we just slipped from summer into fall. So we're heading towards the end of the year, right? We're heading towards the holidays and into the new year. So let's remember that time will continue, but that we've got to capture it, and we've got to continue to tell stories and continue to do what we all do. So again, thanks all of you for coming to this conference. It's been a full house again, and it's wonderful to look out over the audience and see everybody really participating in a variety of ways in this conference. The doors are opening for our historic first annual dessert networking function, and we all hope that you'll just spend a few minutes there. Just two more things, housekeeping. One is that all of our exhibitors are still out in the lobby area. Our exhibitors equal our sponsors. So we want our sponsors to come back next year, right? The sponsors help to underwrite this conference, keep the cost to you low, and enable us to put on such wonderful presentations and bring in speakers. The folks that are at the exhibiting tables are not wallpaper. They are people. So say hello, take their material, thank them for coming, tell them we hope you come back next year. And also Alex will be doing a book signing out in the lobby, so please stop in and chat with him as well. Thanks very much and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.